Class, our topic for today is leases. For me, this is the most challenging topic in FAR, but I'll try my best to simplify this for you. Making discussion natin for today will be a bit more comprehensive. That's why I want you to please be patient and listen very carefully. Are you ready? Let's start. Leases. This topic is under PFRS 16. Let's have an illustration. For example, tayo si ABC, and plano natin magtayo ng isang review center for CPA examinees. We are looking for a 3-story building with an area of 1,000 square meters. Now, since limited yung budget natin, mas prefer natin na magrenta instead of bumili ng building. Kasi pag nagrent tayo, ang bayad natin is monthly, pero kapag bumili tayo ng building, kailangan one-time payment. Now, XYZ, on the other hand, owns a 3-story building. ABC and XYZ entered into a contract of lease. In a contract of lease, there are two parties. Si ABC, ang tawag natin sa kanya, siya si lessee, or siya yung tenant. XYZ is the lessor, or siya yung landlord. Okay? In a contract of lease, the lessor gives the lessee the right to use the asset. In this case, yung asset is a building, for example, for 10 years. Now, si lessee, si ABC, pwede niyang gamitin yung building. Again, plano niya is review center. Let's say yung first 2 floors, gagamitin niya as classrooms, and yung 3rd floor as library. In exchange for the right to use the building, si lessee, kailangan niya magbayad to the lessor. For example, that is 100 pesos per square meter per month. Right? This is an example of a contract of lease. Now, PFRS 16 defines the lease. Sabi doon, a lease is a contract, again, contract between the lessee and the lessor. Ang tawag natin is contract of lease or lease contract. Okay? Marami kang items na makikita in a lease contract. Pero yung mga common ones, makikita mo doon class, nandun yung rental rate. In this case, sa illustration natin, yung 100 pesos per square meter per month, yun yung renta. Okay, babayaran ni lessee to the lessor per month. What else? Makikita mo rin in a lease contract, yung escalation clause. Sir, ano yung escalation clause? Well, escalation clause, meron yan because of inflation. Okay? For example, class, escalation clause is 5%. So yung renta for the first year is 100 pesos per square meter per month. Pagdating ng second year, magiging 105 pesos per square meter per month na siya. Alright? What else? You can also find in a lease contract, the lease term. In our illustration, that is 10 years. Let's call this LT for lease term para mas maikli. And makikita mo din nung class yung security deposit. Siguro familiar kayo kapag nagre-renta, at the start, magbabayad tayo ng, let's say, 2 months advance, 2 months deposit. Yung deposit na yun yung security deposit. And from the term itself, security, ang ibig sabihin niya, class, kapag yung building nagkaroon ng damages, si lessor, ibabawas niya yung amount ng damages na yun dun sa security deposit. Pag may natira pa sa security deposit, ibabalik yun ni lessor to the lessee at the end of lease term. So sa illustration natin, at the end of 10 years. Okay? Now, balik tayo sa definition. A lease is a contract that conveys the right to use the asset. Again, ang may right to use dito is the lessee for a period of time. Ang tawag natin sa period of time is the lease term in exchange for a consideration. So yung consideration is the rental rate, which is 100 pesos per square meter per month. Okay, this is the definition of lease under PFRS 16. Now, let's go to measurement. And we'll divide our discussion into 2 parts. Point of view of the lessee and point of view of the lessor. Start muna tayo with the lessee. Okay? So meron tayong initial and subsequent measurement. Now, ang kailangan mo tandaan, kapag point of view of the lessee, the general rule is all leases shall be classified as a finance lease. Okay, sulat mo muna. As a general rule, from the point of view of the lessee, all leases shall be classified as a finance lease. Sir, ano ba ibig sabihin ng finance lease? Pag sinabing finance lease, class, at initial measurement, January 1, the lessee will recognize or meron siyang journal entry na debit right of use asset. Let's call this ROA para mas maikli, which is a PPE. And then credit lease liability. So tawagin natin siyang LL, okay, para mas maikli siya, which is a non-current liability. So ulitin ko, class, pag sinabing finance lease, sa point of view of the lessee, at initial measurement, January 1, meron siya debit right of use asset or ROA, na ang classification is PPE, credit lease liability or LL, which is a non-current liability. Okay, so yun yung general rule. Since sa general rule yan, ibig sabihin, there are exceptions. Dalawang class yung exceptions natin. Ibig sabihin, we can classify the lease as operating lease. Pero take note na yung exceptions na yan, very rare yan. Hindi yan usually nangyayari. Okay? Now, ano sir yung 2 exceptions na yan? If the lease term is short term, okay? Pag sinabing short term, ibig sabihin 12 months or less. Or if the asset is of low value, pwede tayong mag-operating lease. So, magsasagot tayo dito ng operating lease, pero again, rare yan. So, bakit rare yung dalawa na yan? First, yung pagsabi mong lease, usually matagalan yan. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, even 20 years, ganyan yan. So, kaya rare na 12 months or less yan. So, ano ibig sabihin ng asset is of low value? For example, ang nilease natin is equipment o kaya naman furniture, yung mga ganyan. Usually, hindi naman nangyayari yun kasi ang nilease natin involves significant amount. For example, building, yung mga ganyan. So, ulitin ko class. From the point of view of the lessee, all leases shall be classified as finance lease. Pag narinig nyo yung finance lease, ibig sabihin, debit ROA, credit lease liability. ROA is a PPE, lease liability is a non-current liability. Exceptions, dalawa. Pwede tayo mag-operating lease if the lease is short-term or the assets of low value. Pero rare yan, bihira, mangyari yan. Okay? So, pwede natin isipin, by default, kay lessee, finance lease. Now, ang technique for the point of view of the lessee, dapat malaman natin how do we measure the right of use asset and lease liability. Pag nalaman natin yan, madali na yung accounting from the point of view of the lessee. Start muna tayo with the lease liability. So, focus tayo dito, class. Now, when you say lease liability, this is just the present value. Okay, let's call it PV, present value of minimum lease payments. Okay, minimum lease payments, tawagin natin siyang MLP. Alright? Pag sabi mong lease liability, yung credit ni lessee, it's just the present value of minimum lease payments. So, ano ba ibig sabihin ng minimum lease payments? Tanda mo, class, pag sabing minimum lease payments, these are the payments from the lessee to the lessor. Okay, i-double underline ko yan. Ibig sabihin, mahalaga yan. Okay, babalikan natin later kung bakit siya important. Now, meron tayong 5 items under the minimum lease payments. Tawagin mo siyang MLP. Okay? First item is the fixed rentals. Sa illustration natin class, yun yung 100 pesos per square meter per month. Fix yan. Every month, magbabayad tayo ng ganyang amount. Okay? Again, since ibabayad ni lessee yun kay lessor, part of the minimum lease payments. Next one is the variable rentals. Variable rentals, usually class, common yan sa mga, for example, punta ng SM, di ba, yung mga stalls doon or kiosks, yun, may variable rentals yun. So yung mga stalls or kiosks doon, kasi nagbabayad sila ng 20,000 per month plus 1% of sales. Yung 1% of sales, yun yung variable rent. Okay? So hindi siya ganun ka-common, kaya, pero yun yung variable rentals. Okay? So again, payment siya from the lessee to the lessor. Next is purchase option. Pag sinabi class na purchase option, the lessee has the right to buy the leased asset. Okay? The lessee has the right to buy, pwede niyang bilhin daw yung leased asset. So, sa illustration natin class, nandun sa kontrata, okay, nakalagay doon, si ABC, si lessee, pwede niyang bilhin yung building, okay, within 10 years. Right? So, for example, nakalagay doon, sige, pwede mong bilhin for 10 million. Ang tawag natin doon class is purchase option. Now, if it's reasonably certain na i-exercise ni lessee, isasama natin yun sa minimum lease payments. Alright? And take note class, kapag may purchase option, the leased asset will go to the lessee. Tama lang? The leased asset will go to the lessee. Siyempre, kapag in-exercise ni lessee, binili niya yung building, sa kanya na yung building. Kaya, the leased asset will go to the lessee. Got it? Now, fourth item under minimum lease payments is the guaranteed residual value. Guaranteed residual value. So, kaya siya tinawag na guaranteed. Ibig sabihin, class, ito yung assured residual value at the end of lease term. Okay? So, sa kontrata, sa lease contract between ABC and XYZ, nakalagay doon, ABC. Okay? I-assure mo na yung value ng building is 5 million. At the end of year 10. Okay, tawag natin doon, guaranteed residual value. Ina-assure ni lessee si lessor na ito yung amount o yung value ng building at the end of lease term para merong reason or motivation si lessee na alagaan yung building. Parang ganun, okay? Now, take note class na kapag guaranteed residual value, the leased asset will go or will revert back to the lessor. Alright? So, pag may GRV, the leased asset will revert back to the lessor. Kasi syempre, ina-assure natin si lessor na ganito yung magiging value of the asset at the end of the lease term. Ibig sabihin, babalik natin sa kanya. Napansin nyo, class, opposite siya. Kapag purchase option, the leased asset will go to the lessee. Pero kapag GRV, tawagan siya GRV, the leased asset will revert back or babalik yan kay lessor. So, ibig sabihin ka, since opposite sila, either or lang yung dalawa niyan. Hindi pwedeng magsabay. Alright? So, it's either merong purchase option sa lease contract or merong GRV. Hindi pwedeng sabayan na nasa lease contract. Isa lang dyan. Yes? Okay. And the last one, class, is penalties. For example, pre-terminated yung contract. So sa illustration natin, 10 years yung lease term, pero for some reason, sabi ni lessee, ni ABC, hindi ka na matutuloy yung lease. Magbabayad siya ng penalty. Kasama yun sa minimum lease payments. Now, again, bakit natin sir inaaral yung minimum lease payments? Kailangan natin yan to get the lease liability. So sa 5 items na yan, usually ang common sa problems na may encounter mo, fixed rentals, purchase option, and GRV. Usually variable rentals sa penalties, hindi naman yan lumalabas. Okay? So pwede mo tandaan yung 3 items na yan. Now, sabi ko kanina class is, you have to get the present value. Kasi long-term yung lease eh. Matagalan yan, minsan umaabot ng 20 years. We have to get the present value. And pag nag-present value tayo, kailangan natin ng discount rate. Tama? According to PFRS 16, merong hierarchy yung pag-discount natin. Again, kailangan natin i-discount yung 5 items na yan. First is, we will use the implicit interest rate. Okay? Sir, ano ibig sabihin ng implicit interest rate? Ito class yung required or target return of the lessor. Okay? So kung ilang percent yung gustong kitain ni lessor from the lease, yun yung tinatawag natin na implicit interest rate. Magiging ko, required or target return of the lessor. Siyempre si lessor yung may income dyan, siya yung nakaka-receive ng renta, tama? Yun yung gagamitin natin na pan-discount ng minimum lease payments to get the present value of minimum lease payments. Okay? Now, number 1, ibig sabihin, yan yung first sa hierarchy natin. Pag hindi available yung implicit interest rate, we will use the incremental borrowing rate. Okay? So, ano ibig sabihin ng incremental borrowing rate? Ito yung keyword dyan, borrowing. Ganito yung class. Pag si lessee, sa ABC, pag bibili siya ng similar asset, let's say, bibili siya ng building, okay, na 3-story, pero iba-bank loan niya, uutang siya sa bank, kung how much yung interest na i-charge sa kanya ni bank, yun yung incremental borrowing rate. Okay? So, this is the bank interest rate if the lessee buys a similar asset. Ulitin ko class. Ano ibig sabihin ng implicit interest rate? Yan yung gustong kitain ni lessor from the lease. Yan yung first natin. Pag hindi available, incremental borrowing rate. Ano yung incremental borrowing rate? If si lessee, bibili siya ng similar asset, building na may 3-story, okay? Uutang siya sa bank, mag-loan siya, kung ilang percent yung i-charge sa kanya ni bank, yun yung tinatawag natin na incremental borrowing rate. That's okay. Now, balik tayo dito, class. Sabi ko kanina, kaya ako dinoble underline yan. Yung minimum lease payments, lahat ng payments yan from the lessee to the lessor. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, class, lahat ng payments from the lessee to third parties, hindi yun kasama sa minimum lease payments. That's why, pag sabing lease liability, class, this excludes executory costs. Okay? Excludes executory costs. Sir, bakit natin ina-exclude? Again, pag sabing executory costs, these are the payments from the lessee to third parties. Alright? Ano mga example yan, sir? Well, ang ganda example yan, property taxes. Okay? Kasi class yung taxes na yan, babayaran ni lessee yan to the BIR, which is a third party. Okay? Hindi yan bayad ni lessee to lessor. Bayad yan ni lessee to BIR. Okay? What else? Security. So yung security, kung sino yung nag-provide ng security, yun yung babayaran ni lessee. Okay? So ano pa? Maintenance. Yung mga ganyan. So, these are examples of executory costs. Again, lahat yan payments from lessee to third parties. Hindi yan by the lessee to the lessor. That's why, class, all executory costs are expensed. Okay? Charge to expense yan. Hindi yan papasok ng lease liability natin. Got it? Okay. Now, last one. Tapos na tayo sa lease liability. Punta tayo sa right of use asset. Bakit nga ba natin, class? Inaaral yan, yung mga items na yan? Because kailangan natin yan para malaman natin kung how much yung debit, ROA, credit, lease liability. Okay na tayo sa lease liability. Let's go to ROA. Again, right of use asset is classified as PPE, which is na-discuss natin. Alright? And alam natin, class, yung basic concept ng PPE, pinimeasure natin yan at cost. And pag sinabi mong cost, nandiyan yung purchase price plus directly attributable cost. When you say directly attributable costs, these are all the costs necessary for the assets intended use. Ika-capitalize natin. Ganun lang din yung concept na i-apply natin sa ROA. Okay? Now, pag sinabi mong ROA, meron siyang 4 items. Isa-isay natin, class. First item is the present value of MLP or minimum lease payments. Uy, familiar sir, di ba yung PV of MLP? Yan yung lease liability natin. Yes. So, ibig sabihin, class, yung components, yung compute natin na lease liability, papasok din siya dun sa amount ng ROA natin. Kaya inuna kong diniscuss yung lease liability. Gets? So, again, yung compute mo na present value dyan, isasama natin yan sa ROA. Right? Next item is what we call lease bonus minus lease incentives. Okay? Lease bonus minus lease incentives. Sir, ano ibig sabihin ng lease bonus? Tandaan mo, class, pag sabi lease bonus, payment yan ni lessee to the lessor to get more favorable terms. More favorable terms. So, ano ibig sabihin yan? For example, class, ang sabi ni lessor kay lessee, paparenta ko lang yan. Yung lease term lang usually na pinagbibigyan ko is 10 years. Pero pag gusto mo maging 15 years yan, to get more favorable terms, bayaran mo ko ng additional 100,000 pesos ng January 1. Okay? So again, pag sabing lease bonus, yan yung bayad ni lessee to the lessor to get more favorable terms. Sa illustration natin, ang ina-allow lang talaga ni lessor is 10 years, pero kung gusto mong more favorable, maging 15 years, bayaran mo ko additional 100,000. We call it lease bonus. And lease bonus, kinakapitalize natin yan sa ROA. Now, nakalagay dito, class, minus lease incentive. Hindi plus, minus. Bakit minus, sir? Because yung lease incentive, payment naman yan ni lessor to the lessee. Ang pinakamagandang example dito, class, is reimbursements. For example, sabi ni lessor, sige, lahat ng relocation costs mo, syempre, si lessee, may mga gamit siya na ilalagay dito. Okay? So, lahat ng relocation cost mo, lahat ng mga fees na gagastusin, i-reimburse ko yan. Okay? Sabi ni lessor. So, again, payment ni lessor yun to the lessee. Ang tawag natin dyan, lease incentive. Right? Minus yun. So, again, yung i-capitalize mo sa ROA, lease bonus kasi si lessee yung gumastos yan, minus lease incentive because si lessor yung gumastos yan. Ang magandang example ng lease incentive, reimbursements ni lessor kay lessee. Right? Sige. 2 items to go. Number 3. Kakapitalize natin, class, yung initial direct costs. Lagi nyo mababasa yan, initial direct costs or IDC. Basically, class, pag sinabing initial direct costs, these are the directly attributable costs. Examples are broker's fee. Okay, ano pa? Agent's commission. Okay, finder's fee, yung mga ganyan. So, ano ba ibig sabihin ng broker, agent, finder's fee? So, ganito yung class. Si ABC, siyempre magtatayo siya ng isang review center na 3-story building. Actually, medyo mahirap maghanap ng 3-story building na suitable for a review center. Kaya si ABC, magpapatulong siya sa iba-ibang broker. Ang tawag doon, broker or agent or finders. Okay? Pag sila nakatulong kay ABC sa paghanap ng 3-story building, babayaran ni ABC yan. Okay? Example yun na initial direct cost. Again, necessary yun. Necessary na bayaran natin sila para for us to be able to use the building. Okay? Since necessary siya, it's a directly attributable cost, kailangan natin i-capitalize yan. Alright? Next is, last one, restoration costs. Pag sinabing restoration costs, in a lease, ang typical dyan, class, siyempre, i-occupy natin yung building. And since kailangan natin, pagkatayo tayo ng review center, mag-construct tayo dyan ng mga leasehold improvements na na-discuss natin yan under PPE. Okay? So, sa leasehold improvements, para maging review center yan, lagyan natin ng mga walls, lagyan natin ng ceiling, mga tables, mga chairs, and so on and so forth. Now, possible na nandun sa lease contract, nakasulat doon, na at the end of lease term, at the end of year 10, kailangan natin i-remove lahat ng improvements and kailangan natin i-restore yung property to its original condition. So again, isasama mo yan sa restoration cost kasi tayo gagastos yan as lessee. But take note, dapat written yan in the lease contract. Dapat required tayo na gawin yan. Pag hindi written, huwag mo isasama yan sa ROA. Alright? So again, pag sabi mong ROA, meron siyang 4 components, pero yung first component niya na PV of MLP, bago makuha yan, kailangan alam mo yung 5 items na yan. Alright? So tama ba, class, kung yung ROA mo is lease liability plus 3 other components, tama ba? Pwede natin sabihin na yung ROA is greater than lease liability. Tama? Kasi yung lease liability meron siyang 5 items. Si ROA, 5 items plus 3 items pa. Kaya pwede natin sabihin, mas mataas yung amount ni ROA kaysa kay lease liability. Got it? Okay. Balik tayo sa subsequent measurement. Okay na tayo sa initial measurement. Again, point of view ng lessee, finance lease. Debit ROA, credit lease liability. Alam natin yung components of ROA and lease liability. Punta tayo sa subsequent measurement. Every December 31, paano natin sila i-measure? Doon tayo sa lease liability. Lease liability is subsequently measured at amortized cost. Alam natin, pag sabi amortized cost, gagamit tayo ng amortization table using the effective interest method. Master na master yun na yung amortization table. Okay na tayo dyan. Okay? Now, yung ROA naman, since this is a PPE, measured siya in the balance sheet as cost minus accumulated depreciation minus accumulated impairment, you get the carrying amount or the carrying value. Na-discuss natin yan under PPE. Okay? Pero mag-concentrate tayo, class, sa depreciation. Last one, dito tayo mag-focus. Ito yung mga kailangan mo tandaan sa depreciation for the point of view of the lessee. Again, ang gagamitin mo lang dyan is the straight line method. Yan yung usual, no? For leases, straight line method. Again, pag straight line method, cost minus residual value over useful life. Ang key dito, class, is to know kung ano yung denominator na gagamitin natin. Right? If you remember, yung lease term natin is 10 years. Tama ba, class? Ibig sabihin, after 10 years, ibabalik na natin yung building kay lessor. Yun yung typical in a contract of lease. Pag natapos na yung lease term, balik mo na yung property dun kay lessor. For example, yung building, ang total life niya talaga is 25 years. Okay, lease term is 10 years, useful life is 25 years. Again, ang issue natin, ano yung denominator na gagamitin natin? 10 years or 25 years? Now, para madali nyo matandaan yung class, ask yourself lang, how long would the lessee occupy the building? Gano'ng katagal gagamitin ni lessee yung building? Meron tayong 4 scenarios. Number 1, no transfer of ownership. Okay, ibig sabihin, hindi daw matatransfer yung title from the lessor to the lessee. Yun yung common. Okay? By default, walang transfer of ownership kapag lease. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, pag si lessee ka, tama ba class? Kung walang transfer, aalis na tayo sa building after 10 years. Therefore, i-depreciate natin yung leased asset, yung ROA natin, over the lease term of 10 years. Does that make sense? Okay. Next scenario natin class, pag with transfer, dapat nakasulat sa contract of lease yan. Pag hindi nakasulat sa contract of lease, walang transfer of ownership or title. Pag meron transfer of ownership or title, yung building mapupunta na kay lessee, yung title malilipat sa kanya after 10 years. So, tama ba class? Kapag ganun, si lessee, gano'n niya katagal gagamitin yung building? 25 years. Kasi malilipat na sa kanya. So, depreciate mo yung ROA over the useful life of 25 years. Next, purchase option. Kung maalala nyo class, yung purchase option, si lessee may right siya to buy the asset. Kung bibili ni lessee yung asset, tama ba? Gagamitin ni lessee yung property for 25 years. Buong useful life. That's why, kapag may purchase option, i-depreciate mo siya over useful life of 25 years. GRV, Guaranteed Residual Value. Kung maalala nyo, ibig sabihin yan, iyan yung ina-assure na value ni lessee kay lessor, okay, at the end of the lease term. So, ibig sabihin, kailangan ibalik yan ni lessee yung asset dun kay lessor. So, magagamit lang ni lessee yung property for 10 years, therefore, kailangan i-depreciate yung ROA over lease term of 10 years. Okay? Ito na yung mga kailangan nyo class, sa point of view of the lessee. Let's apply the concepts by answering our handouts. Let's start with the illustrative examples. So, I prepared different scenarios, and illustrative example number 1 is about lease without transfer of title. Basically, the requirement sa ating class is to prepare the journal entries. Now, let's take a look at the given. On January 1, 2025, Company X entered into a lease for a new warehouse. Lease payments are 800,000 a year. Ang tawag natin sa 800,000, fixed rentals yan. And we know fixed rentals are part of minimum lease payments or MLP. Okay? For 5 years. Yung 5 years, that's the lease term or kung gaano katagal yung lease contract. Payable in advance starting January 1, 2025. So, class, pag sinabi mong payable in advance, ibig sabihin, yung first day of the lease, which is January 1, 2025, doon na rin yung first payment na 800,000. Ang tawag natin doon, payable in advance. Sir, bakit important yan? Makaka-affect yan sa PV factors na gagamitin natin later. Okay, balikan natin later yan. The warehouse has an estimated life of 10 years as a useful life, and the entity paid initial direct cost of 100,000 on January 1, 2025. Initial direct cost, we know, directly attributable costs yan. So, capitalizable siya to the right of use asset. The realty taxes of 40,000 a year are to be paid by the entity. Yung 40,000, example yun ng executory costs kasi payment yan ni lessee to the third party, in particular si VAR kasi taxes yan. Right? So again, charge to expense yan, and i-exclude mo yan from the minimum lease payments. The lease provides for neither transfer of title to the lessee upon expiration of the lease term, nor a purchase option. The underlying asset is reverted to the lessor at the expiration of the lease term. Yun yung by default. Okay? So again, by default, in a lease contract, pagkatapos na yung lease term, ibabalik ni lessee yung asset to the lessor. The interest rate implicit in the lease is 10%. So yun yung gagamitin natin, implicit interest rate to get the present value of MLP. Again, pag hindi given yung implicit interest rate, and that's the time that we use the incremental borrowing rate. The relevant value factors or PV factors are as follows. Dalawa yung class. Meron tayong present value of an ordinary annuity, 3.79, and then present value of annuity in advance, 4.17. Sir, ano gagamitin natin dyan? So, depende yung class kung kailan yung unang payment. Okay, so gagawa tayo ng timeline. We have January 1, 2025, January 1, 2026, 27, 28, 29, and 30. Okay, so yun yung lease contract natin. Now, ang unang bayaran dito, if you remember, January 1, 2025, ang tawag natin doon, in advance. Okay? Now, so kapag ganung class, kapag ang bayaran is first day of the lease, ang gagamitin mo dyan is the present value of annuity in advance. Right? Ang tawag din dito class is annuity due. Right? So magkamukha lang yan. Pag nabasa mo, annuity in advance or annuity due, magkamukha lang yan. Kailan mo gagamitin yan? Kapag ang payment is sa first day, January 1. Right? Kapag naman ang payment is 1 year from now, yung first payment is 1 year from now, ang gagamitin mo dyan class is present value of ordinary annuity. Na natutunan natin yan before. Right? So again, pag given sa'yo ng dalawang PV factors, titignan mo muna kung kailan yung first payment. Pag today yung first payment, okay, first day of the lease, annuity in advance or annuity due yung gagamitin mo. Kapag ang bayaran is first payment is 1 year from now, ordinary annuity. Okay, so in this case, ang gagamitin natin is 4.17. Right, so now, gagawin natin dyan classes, first step is to get the present value of minimum lease payments. So again, meron tayong fixed rentals in the problem, that's 800,000. 800,000 times 4.17, so let's compute 800,000 times 4.17, you should get 3,336,000. Let's journalize. January 1, 2025, entry natin classes debit, right of use asset or ROA, credit lease liability, 3,336,000. Okay. Now, again, ang unang bayaran is today din. So, meron tayong next payment. Entry natin, debit, lease liability, credit cash, 800,000. What else? Ano pa nangyari on January 1? So, tingin ka dun sa middle portion of the problem. The entity paid initial direct cost. Initial direct cost, capitalizable yun to ROA. So, entry natin, debit ROA, credit cash, 100,000. So, take note class, after the initial direct cost, yung carrying amount na ng ROA natin is 3,336,000 plus 100,000 or 3,436,000. While yung lease liability natin, meron tayong 3,336 and nagbayad tayo ng isang 800,000. Right? So, these are journal entries on January 1. Now, punta tayo sa December 31. On December 31, which is subsequent measurement, we know lease liability is measured at amortized cost. Gagamit tayo ng amortization table. Bibilisan ko lang kasi alam ko, master nyo na yung paggawa ng amortization table. So, we have date, we have the payment, interest expense, amortization, and carrying amount. Alright, so we have January 1, 2025. January 1, 2025. Take note, dalawa yung nilagay kong January 1, 2025. Kasi ang first payment is January 1, 2025. January 1, 2026. January 1, 2027, 2028, and 2029. So again, payment natin is 800,000 per year. So lagyan natin dyan 800,000. 800,000. Okay, and then carrying amount natin class, na-compute natin earlier, the present value is 3,336,000. Pero ang payment din is today, wala ka pang interest expense kasi January 1, 2025 yan. So amortization natin is 800,000. 3,336,000 minus 800,000, you will get 3,336,000 minus 800, you will get 2,536,000. This is our carrying amount on January 1. Actually, ito siya class sa journal entries natin. May credit tayo na 3,336, nag-debit ka na 800, makukuha mo dyan 2,536,000. Okay, let's complete the amortization table. Interest expense is based on the implicit interest rate. 2,536,000 times 10%, you get 2,536,000. 800,000 minus 2,536,000. Amortization natin class is 5,464,000. Carrying amount natin is 1,989,600. Take note, decreasing yung carrying amount natin, pababa siya. Because at the end of the lease term, our carrying amount, the lease liability, should be equal to 0. Right, so interest expense in 2027, that is 198,960. Amortization natin is 601,040. Carrying amount is 1,388,560. In 2028, interest expense is 138,856. Amortization is 661,144. Carrying amount is 727,416. And then last year, 2029, 725,884 interest expense. Amortization is 727,416. Carrying amount natin is 0. So this is the complete amortization table. Now, doon tayo sa December 31, 2025. Take note again na ang bayaran is every January 1. So kung titingin ka dito sa row na yan, this is January 1, 2026. So gagawin mo lang dyan class, on December 31, kailangan ka lang mag-accrue ng interest, yung 253,600. Debit interest expense, credit interest payable, 253,600. So yung payment natin na 800,000, pwede mo siyang isipin class na meron dyan two components. Yung 800,000, meron siyang interest component which is 253,600 and meron siyang principal component which is 546,400. Pero yung principal component, bukas mo pababayaran yan, January 1, 2026. So wala ka pang entry for the principal on December 31. Gets, meron ka lang accrued interest. Now, what else? What happened pa yung the problem? So, meron daw realty taxes of 40,000 a year. Again, executory costs yan, so charge natin to expense. Debit taxes expense, credit cash, bayad natin kay BIR yan, 40,000. Okay, so don't forget to depreciate. Kasi meron tayong right of use asset na may carrying amount na 3,436 and because it's a PPE, we have to measure it at cost. And kapag may cost yan, meron ka accumulated depreciation. So we have to depreciate it. Now, ang important dito is, again, straight line method gagamitin natin. Anong useful life or anong denominator na gagamitin natin dyan? According to the problem, meron tayong lease term na 5 years and useful life of 10 years. Ano gagamitin mo? 5 or 10? Answer natin dyan is 5 years because sa illustrative example number 1, no transfer of ownership. Ibig sabihin, at the end of the lease term, ibabalik natin yung asset to the lessor. So, i-depreciate natin siya over lease term. So, 3,436,000, i-divide natin by 5. Tingnan natin class. 3,436,000 divided by 5, you get 687,200. This is your depreciation. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, 687,200. So basically class, kapag yung P&L effect or FX income statement for the year, meron kang interest expense, meron kang taxes expense, and depreciation expense. Alright? So yun yung mga P&L effect natin. Now, pakita ko rin sa inyo class kung ano yung entry January 1, 2026. So next day, ano entry natin dyan, sir? So next day, January 1, 2026, ito na lang. Kailangan bayaran natin yung interest and yung principal. So meron tayong debit interest payable, which is 253,600. Meron tayong debit lease liability, the principal component, 546,400. Credit cash, 800,000. Yun. So yun yung journal entry natin, January 1. Ulitin ko, December 31, mag-accrue ka lang ng interest. January 1, bayaran mo yung interest, bayaran mo yung principal, total of 800,000. And then, December 31, 2026, isa pa class. December 31, 2026, mag-accrue lang tayo ng interest ulit. So debit interest expense, credit interest payable, 198,960. And then meron ulit tayong taxes, debit taxes expense, credit cash, 40,000, that's 40,000 per year. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, straight line method yan, so that is still 687,400. Okay, so ganun lang. Every year, ganyan lang yung magiging entry natin. And the next day, bayad ulit ng interest and principal. Yan, so these are the entries for 2025 and 2026. Don't forget class, every time, basta meron kang ROA sa books, lagi kang mag-depreciate every December 31. Ang tanong natin dyan, ano yung gagamitin mo? Lease term or useful life? Again, kung hanggang kailan gagamitin lessee yung asset. In this case, walang transfer of ownership, 5 years yung gagamitin mo or lease term. Let's take a look at requirement number 2. Prepare journal entry upon expiration of the lease on January 1, 2030. So again, because wala naman transfer of ownership, ibabalik natin yung asset kay lessor. So paano yun? Tanggalin mo lang yung asset dun sa books natin. So mag-credit tayong ROA, tanggalin natin sa books yan. ROA natin is 3,436,000. And then, tanggalin mo yung accumulated depreciation, debit accumulated depreciation, complete natin class. Kung meron tayong depreciation na 687,200 per year times 5, well, fully depreciated siya. So 3,436,000. Ganoon lang pala. So debit, accumulated depreciation, credit ROA, 3,436,000. Yun lang. Entry natin kapag binalik na natin yung asset to the lessor. Alright, so this is illustrative example number 1. Now, i-compare natin yung class sa illustrative example number 2. So erase ko to para may space tayo. Main difference nila is, for number 2, we have transfer of ownership. Tingnan natin kung ano yung maging difference dun sa accounting treatment. Alright, so let's take a look at the given. On January 1, 2025, Company X closed a lease contract for newly constructed terminals and freight storage facilities. Although the terminals have a composite life of 10 years, that's a useful life, the lease runs for 5 years with transfer of title. So doon pa lang, nakalagay with transfer of title. Dapat nakasulat yun sa lease contract. Pag hindi nakasulat sa lease contract na may transfer of title, again, by default, yung illustrative example number 1, without transfer of title. Reading ko, by default, without transfer of title. Kailan magkakaroon ng transfer of title? Dapat explicit yan. Okay? So, ibig sabihin class, ang makaka-affect dito, yung may effect yan sa depreciation. Since may transfer of title tayo, i-depreciate mo yung asset over the useful life. Right? Sige. The annual lease payment is 1 million payable at the end of each year starting December 31. So, yung first day natin of the lease, January 1. Yung first payment, December 31. Anong gagamitin mo doon? Annuity in advance or ordinary annuity? Ordinary annuity. Kasi yung first payment mo is 1 year from now. Okay? The lessee must also make an annual payment of 75,000 for taxes and 125,000 for insurance. Yung taxes, pabayaran mo kay BIR. Insurance, pabayaran mo sa insurance company. So, third party sila. Third party sila, executory costs, yan charge natin later sa expense. The lessee incurred initial direct cost of 150 capitalizable as an incentive to the lessee. The lessor agreed to reimburse the lessee for the commission of 50,000. Ano tawag natin dyan, class? Well, si lessor yung gumastos yan, tama? Ang tawag natin dyan, lease incentive. And yung lease incentive, mina-minus natin yan. So, babawas natin later yan sa row 1 natin, okay? The contract was negotiated to assure the lessor a 10% rate of return. The present value of ordinary annuity is 3.79. Yun yung gagamitin natin. The present value of annuity in advance, ignore mo yan. Panlito lang yan. Okay? Prepare the journal entry. So, ganito gagawin ko dyan, class. Meron tayong rentals na 1 million per year. Present value of ordinary annuity is 3.79. You will get 3,790,000. This is our lease liability. January 1, 2025, debit ROA, credit lease liability, 3,790,000. What else? Ano pa nangyari dyan? Tingin ka sa middle portion of the problem. Meron tayong initial direct cost of 150,000. Debit ROA, credit cash, 150,000. And then, meron tayong lease incentive na 50,000. So again, pag lease incentive, ang gumastos yan si lessor. Kapag lease bonus, ang gumastos si lessee. Pag lease bonus, capitalize. Pag lease incentive, ima-minus natin yan. So debit cash, credit ROA, okay, 50,000. Okay, 50,000. And then next, punta tayo sa December 31. December 31, 2025, again, gagamit tayo ng amortization table. Gawin natin this time partial amortization table lang. So we have date, we have payment, we have interest expense, okay, amortization, and carrying amount. January 1, 2025, December 31, 2025, and December 31, 2026. Nakuha natin present value is 3,790,000. Okay, payment natin is 1 million per year. Interest expense for 2025, 3,790,000 times yung implicit interest rate natin is 10%, so that is 3,790,000. Amortization natin class, 1 million minus 3,790,000 is 621,000. Carrying amount is 3,169,000. In 2026, interest expense natin is 316,900. Amortization is 683,100. And then carrying amount is 2,485,900. Okay, so in 2 years lang ginawa ko na amortization table natin. Now, I'll show you na kapag ordinary annuity, or kapag, hindi pa, I'll show you na kapag ang bayaran is every December 31, mas madali sa journal entry natin. Okay? So if you remember class, sa illustrative example number 1, ang bayaran is every January 1. Sa illustrative example 2, ang bayaran is every December 31. Mas madali mag-journal entry kapag every December 31. So pakita ko sa inyo class. December 31, 2025, bayaran natin yung interest, debit interest expense, credit cash, 379,000. Bayaran natin yung principal, 621, debit lease liability, credit cash, 621,000. So pag in-add mo yung 379 plus 621, that is your 1 million. Pwede mong isipin na yung 1 million na total payment, meron siyang interest component and meron siyang principal component. So, yan. And then January 1, wala ka ng entry. Unlike kanina, to recall, ang ginawa natin kapag every January 1 yung bayaran, meron kang accrued interest, and the next day, January 1, babayaran mo yung interest and yung principal. Kapag every December 31, straightforward lang. Bayad ka ng interest, bayad ka ng principal. Kaya sabi ko kanina, mas madali yung entries kapag December 31 yung bayaran compared to January 1. Alright? Don't forget na meron pa tayong ibang entries. No? So meron pa tayong executory costs, debit taxes expense, how much ulit ang class? 75,000 according to the middle portion of the problem. Debit insurance expense, 125,000. Credit cash, 200,000. And again, don't forget na meron tayong ROA. Kapag may ROA ka, pag-depreciate ka. So how much yung carrying amount ng ROA natin? From January 1, meron kang 3,790. And then, meron kang 150 plus 150 minus 50. Carrying amount mo dyan class is 3,890,000. And since there is a transfer of ownership, ibig sabihin, magagamit natin yung asset over its useful life. I-divide natin yan by the useful life of, I think, 10 years. Tama? 10 years yung useful life dito. So 3,890 divided by 10, depreciation natin class is 389,000. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, 389,000. Yan. So pag ang tinanong sa'yo, how much yung carrying amount of the lease liability, December 31, 2025, siyempre, tingin ka lang sa amortization table natin. Pag tinanong sa'yo, how much yung interest expense, tingin ka lang sa table. Pag tinanong sa'yo, how much yung carrying amount ng right of use asset, well, 3,890,000, yan yung cost, minus mo sa accumulated depreciation na 389,000. Okay, that's for 2025. Gawin na natin yung 2026. So, December 31, 2026, bayad tayo ng interest, debit interest expense, credit cash, 316,900. Bayad tayo ng principal, debit lease liability, credit cash, 683,100. Hindi natin kailangan mag-accrue ng interest since ang bayaran is every December. Now, don't forget na meron tayong entries ulit for the executory costs, taxes expense 75, insurance expense 125, and then meron pa rin tayong depreciation of 389,000 because straight line depreciation yan, so constant amount per year. So, lagay ko lang dito same, right? So, ito pa rin yung entries natin for December 31, 2026. Okay? So, ayan, yun yung main difference between illustrative example 1 and number 2. Sige, let's do illustrative example number 3. For this one naman class, we will learn kung paano naman kapag yung lease is with purchase option. With purchase option, ito siya. Tama? So again, ang important dyan is yung purchase option, isasama natin yan sa present value of minimum lease payments or sa measurement of our lease liability. Okay? And ayan, so dapat reasonably certain siya. So again, pag sa yung purchase option, si lessee, meron siyang right to purchase or to buy the asset from the lessor. So again, dapat indicated pa rin yan sa lease contract. Sige, so basically, ang requirements natin is to prepare the journal entries. Let's read the given. On January 1, 2025, Company X leased a machine with the following provisions. Okay, annual lease payment in advance at the beginning of each year. Beginning of each year. Sabi niyo, sir, pag ganyan, gagamitin namin is annuity in advance. Also called annuity due. Okay? And then, lease term is 10 years. Useful life is 15 years. Now, since may purchase option yan, ilang years mo i-depreciate yung asset? 10 years or 15 years? Kapag may purchase option, mapupunta sa atin yung asset. Therefore, i-depreciate mo siya over useful life. So, gagamitin natin later, 15 years. Implicit interest rate is 12%. Present value of ordinary annuity, 5.65. Annuity in advance, ignore mo yung ordinary annuity. Ang gagamitin natin annuity in advance because ang first payment is today. Okay? Present value of 1. Pag sabing present value of 1, ibig sabihin, isang bayaran lang. Alin dito yung isang bayaran lang? Yung purchase option. Okay? So yun yung gagamitin mo later sa purchase option. The entity has the option to purchase the machine on January 1, 2035 by paying 200,000. At the commencement date, it is reasonably certain that the purchase option will be exercised. Prepare the journal entries. Ganito gagawin ko dyan, class. Computing ko muna yung lease liability natin. Meron tayong rentals na how much ulit? 1 million. Mumultiply ko yan by annuity in advance, 6.328. 1 million times 6.328, 6,328,000. And then may purchase option tayo. Kasama yan sa pag-compute ng lease liability natin. So, 200,000, multiply mo yan dun sa annuity, present value of 1. Pag sabing present value of 1, isang bayaran lang. Okay? One-time payment yung purchase option na yan. So, 0.322. 200,000 times 0.322, you get 64,400. Add natin yung dalawa na yan, 6,328,000 plus 64,400, you get 6,392,400. Ang tawag natin dito, class, that is your lease liability. Let's journalize. January 1, 2025, debit ROA, credit lease liability, 6,392,400. And then, ang payment natin is today din, debit lease liability, credit cash, payment per year is 1 million. Okay, so ganyan siya. Let's go to December 31, 2025. Natin lagay. December 31, 2025. Again, gawa tayo ng partial amortization table. Okay, so date, payment, interest expense, amortization, and carrying amount. Okay, so again, laki tayong gagawa ng amortization table for leases because again, effective interest method. Gagamit tayo ng amortization table. So, January 1, 2025. First payment is January 1, 2025. Pansin nyo, class, kapag ang annuity in advance, dalawang January 1, 2025 yung nilalagay ko. Okay? Para mas malinaw yung analysis natin. January 1, 2026, 2027. So, tingnan natin, class, payment is 1 million per year. So, lagyan natin siya dyan. Na-compute natin na present value is 6,392,400. Pero babayaran natin yung 1 million same day. Okay, so 6,392,400 minus 1,5,392,400. Let's compute the interest expense. Implicit interest rate in the problem is 12%. So 5,392,400 times 12%, you get 647,088. Amortization natin, 1 million minus 647,088, 352,912. Carrying amount natin, class, is 5,039,488. Times 12%, interest expense is 604,739. Amortization is 395,261. Carrying amount is 4,644,227. Okay? So, ganyan siya. So, December 31, 2025, focus tayo dito. Again, since every January 1 yung bayaran, mag-accrue lang tayo ng interest. I-accrue natin yung 647,088. Debit interest expense, credit interest payable, 647,088. Wala naman sinabi mga executory cost, so hindi natin kailangan mag-journalize doon. Pero since meron tayong ROA, kailangan mag-depreciate tayo. Okay? So, 6,392,400, merong purchase option, i-divide natin yan sa useful life of 15 years. 6,392,400 divided by 15, you should get 426,160. Okay? Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, 426,160. Ayan, journal entry natin, December 31, 2025. Journalize na rin natin yung January 1. January 1, 2026, bayaran natin yung interest, debit interest payable, 647,088. Bayaran natin yung principal component, debit lease liability, 352,912. Ang total niyan, credit cash, 1 million. Okay, so yung entry natin, January 1, 2026. Alright. And then let's go to, journalize na rin natin yung December 31, 2026. December 31, 2026, punta dun sa next natin na row, mag-accrue tayo ng interest, debit interest expense, credit interest payable, 604,739, right? And then don't forget to depreciate, debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, 426,160. These are the journal entries for 2025 and 2026. Na yung class, papakita ko sa inyo kung ano yung journal entry upon exercise of the purchase option. Okay, sir, paano yung entry kapag binili na yung asset? So, ganito yung class. Again, hindi ko na-complete yung amortization table kasi sobrang haba, 15 years yan. Shortcut ko na lang. Okay, so sa dulo class, pag kinomplete mo yung amortization table na sa dulo, January 1, 2035, okay, so yung payment doon is the purchase option na 200,000, interest expense doon is 22,105, amortization is 177,895, and carrying amount is 0. Again, shinortcut yung table natin. Kasi pag kinumplete mo yan, 15 na rows yan. Okay? Pero sa dulo, ito yung makikita mo. 200,000, because sinama natin yan sa pag-compute ng present value, nandito yan. Okay, interest expense, 22,105, and then amortization. Carrying amount mo, because end of lease term na yan, okay, oh, sorry, 10 years pala, hindi pala 15 years. No? So yung amortization table mo is for 10 years. So 10 na rows yung makikita mo dyan. Carrying amount is 0. Now, ito class yung entry natin upon exercise of the purchase option. Exercise of PO, okay, ganito yung entry mo dyan. January 1, 2035, okay, is simply, i-journalize mo yung nasa amortization table natin. Debit interest expense, 22,105, okay? Debit lease liability, debit interest payable tayo kasi inaccrue yan last year, okay? Debit interest payable, 22,105, debit lease liability, which is 177,895, credit cash 200,000. Okay, so this is your entry for the exercise of the purchase option. Kung mapapansin nyo, kung ano yung nasa amortization table natin, usual entry, ganun lang din yung entry mo kapag nag-exercise ka ng purchase option. Again, debit interest payable, 22,105 kasi inaccrue mo yan last December 31, tama? Debit lease liability, 177,895. Credit cash, which is the purchase option, 200,000. This is the entry upon exercise of the purchase option. Okay? Sige. Now, jump tayo class dun sa main problem number 2. Okay? Main problem number 2, this is still about lease with purchase option. Okay? So, same concepts lang yung i-apply natin. Pero this time, multiple choice naman. No? Main problem number 2. Sige. We have 5 questions here, and let's take a look at the given. Shell Enterprises has a long-standing policy of acquiring company equipment by leasing. Early in 2021, the company entered into a lease for a new milling machine. The lease stipulates that annual payments will be made for 5 years. Lease term natin is 5 years. The payments are to be made in advance on, it should be January 1. Okay? Ulitin ko. The payments are to be made in advance on January 1 of each year. Kasi yung start is January 1. Okay? So, first payment is January 1, not December 31. At the end of the 5-year period, it may purchase the machine. May purchase option. The estimated economic life is 12 years, useful life yan. The company uses the calendar year for reporting purposes, straight line depreciation. Okay, so, tingnan natin. Annual lease payments, including executory costs of 5,000. So, tatanggalin natin yan. Kasi alam natin, executory cost expense yan. So, 60,000 minus 5,000, lagay mo dyan, yung payments natin is 55,000 per year. Purchase option, 25,000. Estimated fair value of machine after 5 years. Now, take note class na for this problem, yung lease term natin is 5 years. Useful life natin is 12 years. Tama ba? And since may purchase option, alam natin class, 12 years yung gagamitin mo sa pag-depreciate. And to recall, yung formula natin sa straight line depreciation, cost minus salvage value or residual value over useful life. Okay? So, yung salvage value na yung class, dapat ang gamitin mo is salvage value at the end of year 12. Alright? Kasi mapupunta sa atin yung asset eh. So, that's why nakalagay dyan, estimated fair value after 5 years, i-disregard mo yan. Dapat end of year 12 yung gamitin mo kasi mapupunta sa atin yung asset. Alright? So, X mo yan, hindi mo sasama yan. And then, again, useful life na gagamitin natin is 12 years. Implicit rate is 10%. Date of first lease payment is January 1, 2021. Take note, sa problem, walang PV factors. Okay? So, tuturuan ko kayo kung paano mag-compute ng PV annuity na in advance or annuity due. Okay? Sige. Question number 1, amount to be capitalized an asset for the lease of the milling machine. Question number 2, liability under finances or yung lease liability and so on and so forth. So, paano gagawin mo dyan? So, ganito gagawin ko dyan, class. For number 1, compute natin yung present value. Dalawa yan. Yung rentals and yung present value ng purchase option. Okay? So, present value ng rentals, again, annuity in advance yung gagamitin natin. So, 55,000, multiply yan sa PV factor. Sir, bakit 55,000? Again, 60,000 per year, minus natin yung 5,000 executory costs. Okay? Now, to better visualize, ganito nangyari dyan, class. So, January 1, 2025, dyan yung first payment, so 2021 yata yung year dito. Yan yung first payment, January 1, 2022. There's a second payment, 23, 24, 25, and 26. So ganito yung class. Yung rentals natin, meron kang 55,000, 55,000, 55, 55, and 55. Okay, kasi 5 years eh. Tama? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yan yung bayad natin na renta every year. And then meron tayong babayaran na purchase option na 25,000 sa year 2026. Okay, so ganyan siya. Now, ganito yung class. Para ma-compute mo yung PV factor, kasi tinuro ko pala sa inyo so far yung present value of ordinary annuity. Sir, hindi ko pala tuturo yung present value of annuity in advance or annuity due. Ganito yung class. Di ba kapag present value of ordinary annuity, 5 times ka lang. So gagawin mo lang dyan, 1.10, tapos divide equals, tapos 5 M plus. Nalala nyo yan? Kapag annuity in advance, tandaan mo class, 4 na M plus, and then sa dulo, magpa-plus 1 ka. Ulitin ko. Kapag in advance, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then ipa-plus 1 mo, ibig sabihin ng plus 1, iyon yung first payment. Okay? Kasi yung present value ng 55,000 today is also 55,000, kaya plus 1. Okay? So, sabayan niyo ako sa calculator class. Gagawin ko dyan, 1.1, okay? Divide equals, M plus ko, 4 times, so M plus, divide, M plus, divide, M plus, divide, M plus. And then, recall memory mo, na-compute mo ba yung 3.1698? Na-compute mo yan? Tsaka mag plus 1. Okay? Plus 1, you will get 4.1699. Okay yan? So, dyan ko i-multiply yung 55,000. 4.1699. Usually naman, class, given yung PV factors sa mga questions in the board exam. Just in case lang na hindi given, at least alam mo siya. Ulitin ko. Ulitin natin, class. 1.1, kasi 10% yung implicit interest rate, divide, equals M plus, equals M plus, equals M plus, equals M plus. 4 na beses. Recall memory, and then mag plus 1 ka dyan. Okay? Makukuha mo yung 4.1699. 55,000 times 4.1699, you will get 229, 3, 4, 5. Round up na natin. Okay. Don't forget na isama yung present value ng purchase option. Yung purchase option, present value of 1 lang yan kasi isang bayaran lang yan. Ilang beses? O ilang periods? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yung usual lang. Okay. Ganito gagawin ko dyan. 1.1 divide equals na 5 beses. Equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Makukuha mo dyan 0.6209. So, 25,000 times 0.6209. Right? So, 25,000 times 0.6209, you will get 15,523. Okay. So, add natin yan. 229. 345 plus 15, 523, you will get 244,868 Okay, so this is our lease liability. Yan din yung row 1 natin. Debit row 1, credit lease liability, 244868. Sagot natin yan for question number 1, letter C. Question number 2, liability under finance lease. Yan din yung ibang term sa lease liability. Okay, liability under finance lease. So gawin ko dito class, para sigurado tayo sa sagot natin, gawa ko ng partial amortization table since 2021 lang naman yung tinatanong sa atin. Actually, gawin ko 2021 and 2022. We have date, we have payment, interest expense, we have amortization, and we have the carrying amount. So we have January 1, 2021. Nagbayad tayo same day, January 1, 2021. January 1, 2022. And January 1, 2023. Okay? So, carrying amount natin, 244,868. So, lagay natin yung first payment is 55,000. 55,000 and 55,000. Alright. Now, first payment is 55,000. So, carrying amount natin, 244,868 minus 55,000. You will get 189,868. Okay, complete ko class yung amortization table. Multiply ko yan by implicit rate natin, yung 8, this is 10%, 18,987. Okay, so para sigurado times 0.1, 8987 minus 55,000, you will get 36013. Okay, so update natin yung carrying amount as 189,868. You get 153,855, and then times 0.1, 153,855 times 0.1, 153,855 times 0.1, you get 15,386 minus 55,000, you get 39,614, and then plus 153,855, you get 114,241. Okay, so gumawa lang ako ng partial amortization table class, no? So, question number 2 is, what is the liability under finance lease December 31, 2021? Punta ka dito, or that is also your January 1, 2022. Okay, that's also December 31, 2021. So, 153,855, that gives you letter B, 153,855. Number 3, amount to be reported under current liabilities as a under finance leases of December 31. So, ganito yung class. Para malaman mo yung current liability and non-current liability, ganito lang gagawin mo class. Tama ba? As of December 31, 2021, yung total liability natin is 153,855. Tama lang? So, yun yung total, 153,855. Alam natin class, meron yung current liability component and merong non-current liability component. Okay, so paano natin malaman yung current liability? Tandaan mo class, yung current portion yan is your amortization next year. Ano yung amortization next year natin? Ito, 39,614. Okay? Kaya in-extend ko yung paggawa ng amortization table until next year. Okay? So 39,614, yan yung current portion of our lease liability. 39,614. Nako yan. So again, ito yung total liability as of December 31, 2021. Okay? Paano malalaman kung how much yung current liability natin next year? Okay? Kung how much yung amortization next year? 39,614. So paano namin malaman kung how much yung non-current? The difference lang nila. Total, 153,855 minus 39,614. Yung non-current portion natin is 114,241, which is also equal to the carrying amount next year. Nakuha niyan. So, pwede mo rin gawin actually class, yung 153,855, i-minus mo yan sa carrying amount last year, that's your amortization. Tama, yun yung current portion. Or pwede mong gawin, 153,855, yung current portion is your amortization next year, difference nila, yun yung non-current portion. That's why, sagot natin class, for number 3, current liability is 39,614, letter A. Question number 4, interest expense, 2021. Tingin ka lang dun sa table natin. So that is 18,987, boy, sagot natin dyan. And then depreciation expense, so tingnan natin. Tama ba yung row 1 natin class is this one, tama? 244,868. So 244,868, hindi sa atin binigay yung residual value after 12 years. Ang binigay sa atin is after 5 years. Ignore mo yun kasi mapupunta sa atin yung asset. Ano gagamitin mo denominator? 5 or 12? Siyempre 12 years. 244,868, i-divide natin by 12. 244,868 divided by 12, you get 2406. 2406. Sagot natin class for question number 5 is letter A. Okay, 20,406. Okay, so that's how you do lease with purchase option. Now, punta naman tayo class sa illustrative example number 4. This time, meron naman tayong tinatawag na guaranteed residual value or GRV. Later, actually, sa number 5, no, meron naman tayong unguaranteed residual value. So, mako-compare natin yung treatment. What if the lease has a guaranteed residual value? And what if the lease has an unguaranteed residual value? So, first off, to recall, pag sabi mong guaranteed residual value, it means merong assured value tayo kay lessor. At the end of useful life, ganito yung value ng asset. Okay? So again, yun yung reason para at least alagahan natin yung property. Alright? So may promise tayo kay lessor na ganito yung amount yan or yung value yan at the end of the lease term. So tingnan natin class. Okay, so we have 3 scenarios here and then requirements natin is prepare the journal entries under the 3 scenarios. On January 1, 2025, Company X leased a machine. Information on the lease follows. Annual rent payable at the start of each year. Ang tawag natin doon, annuity in advance, also called annuity due, 50,000. Lease term is 4 years, useful life is 5 years. Implicit interest rate 12%, binigyan tayo ng present value, annuity due 3.4018 and present value of 1. Company X guarantees residual value 15,000 on lease expiration, of which Company X expects to pay when the leased asset is reverted back to the lessor. So again class, to recall, yung guaranteed residual value is part of the present value of minimum lease payments. So kasama siya sa computation ng lease liability. Again, bakit ulit kasama sa computation? Because pag sinabing lease liability, lahat ng payments yan from the lessee to the lessor. So technically, yung GRV parang payment din natin yan kay lessor, kaya kasama yan. Okay? So ganito gagawin ko dyan class. Computing ko muna yung lease liability. So meron tayong rentals na 50,000 per year multiply natin sa PV of annuity due na 3.4018. Okay, 50,000 times 3.4018, you should get 170,090. And then, i-present value natin yung GRV kasi part of your lease liability, 15,000, multiply natin by present value of 1 na 0.6355. Sir, bakit present value of 1? Kasi isang bayaran lang yung GRV na yan, sa dulo lang yan, okay? So, 15,000 times 0.6355, you get 9533. Alright? So, 170,090 plus 9533, you get 179,623. This is your lease liability. Journal entry, January 1, 2025, debit ROA, credit lease liability, 179,623. Bayaran din natin, same day, yung first payment na 50,000, debit lease liability, credit cash, 50,000. Let's go to December 31. Pero gawa muna tayo ng amortization table. We have date, we have payment, interest expense, amortization, and carrying amount. Alright? January 1, 2025. First payment is January 1, 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029. Again, payment natin is 50K per year. Alright? And then, sa dulo, so taking note class, yung lease term natin is 4 years. Kaya meron tayong 4 na 50,000. Sa dulo, meron tayong 15,000, which is our GRV. Gets? Okay. So, na-compute natin na carrying amount or present value is 179,623, pero binayaran natin yung 50,000 same day. So 179,623 minus 50,000, you get 129,623. Interest expense natin is 12%, or interest rate is 12%. I-complete ko na class yung amortization table, 129,623 times 12%, that is 15,585. Let's verify. Times 12%, 15,555 pala. Okay? Amortization natin is 34,445, carrying amount 95,178. For 2027, interest expense 11,421, amortization is 38,579, and carrying amount 56,599. Interest expense 2028, 6,792, amortization is 43,208, carrying amount is 13,391. And last year, 1,609 interest expense, amortization 13,391, and 0 carrying amount. So this is your amortization table. Punta tayo sa December 31, 2025. Again, bayaran natin is every January 1, so mag-accrue tayo ng interest. Debit interest expense, credit interest payable, 15,555. Next day, mag-depreciate mo tayo kasi may ROA tayo. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation. Paano natin kukumpitin yung depreciation expense natin? Tama ba class? So ROA natin is 179,623. Ima-minus mo yung residual value, which is the GRV. Okay? So guaranteed residual value natin is 15,000. Kasi pag straight line method, cost minus residual value or salvage value divided by useful life. So 179,623 minus the residual value of 15,000. Pero since guaranteed residual value yan, the asset will revert back to the lessor. Okay? Magagamit lang natin yung asset for 4 years, which is the lease term. So divide natin by 4. 179,623 minus 15,000 divided natin by 4, you get 41,156. 41,156. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, 41,156. Got it? So cost, ROA, minus the GRV, i-divide natin by the lease term of 4. Bakit ulit by lease term? Bakit hindi useful life? Pag may GRV, pupunta yung asset sigurado kay lessor. Okay, so gawin natin class yung entry, January 1, 2026. Bayaran natin yan. Debit interest payable, credit cash, 15,555. Bayaran natin yung principal component, debit lease liability, credit cash, 34,445. Okay. Let's do the 3 scenarios. Scenario number 1. Dito na lang. Scenario number 1. What if though class, the fair value of the leased asset on January 1, 2029, which is the end of the lease term, is 15,000? So ganito gagawin ko dyan. Scenario number 1, tama ba class yung pre-promise natin na GRV is 15,000? Tama. And then yung actual na fair value niya at the end of the lease term, sabi sa scenario 1, is also 15,000. So sakto yung pre-promise natin. So may difference tayo na 0. Ibig sabihin, wala tayong cash na babayaran kay lessor. So entry natin, pag binalik na natin yung asset kay lessor, debit accumulated depreciation, credit ROA, syempre babalik na natin yung asset. Tama? How much yung ROA natin? 179,623. Okay? How much yung accumulated depreciation natin? 41,156. Multiply natin by 4 kasi 4 yung lease term. 164,624. 164,624. Take note na hindi balance yan kasi meron tayong residual value. Okay? So yung cost mo accumulated depreciation, hindi yan balance. Balancing figure dyan is debit loss on lease. Okay? Debit loss na lang, 15,000, which is your GRV. Okay? So ulitin ko, may loss ka kasi hindi balance yung cost and accumulated depreciation pero wala kang additional cash payment. Yun yung for scenario number 1. Scenario number 2, mapakita ko sa inyo class na meron tayong additional cash payment. Yung GRV natin is 15,000, but according to scenario number 2, the fair value of the asset is 5,000. Therefore, pre-promise mo 15, and then 5,000 lang, yung difference yan, 10,000. Kailangan bayaran mo yan. So entry natin, pag binalik natin yung asset, debit accumulated depreciation, 164,624, credit ROA, okay, which is 179,623, and then meron kang credit cash, babayaran mo yung difference sa 10,000. Alright? Debit loss natin, balancing figure is 25,000. Ayun, mas malaki yung loss natin sa scenario number 2 kasi, again, meron kang additional cash payment na 10,000. Dito wala kang cash payment sa scenario number 1. Got it? So let's go to scenario number 3. The fair value, scenario 3, the fair value is 20,000. So yung pre-promise natin 15, sobra-sobra pa. Okay, so sobra-sobra pa, yung actual, ibig sabihin, ayun, well, yung 5,000 hindi ka babayaran ng lesser dyan, walang ganun. So pag nag-exceed sa guaranteed residual value, yung fair value, entry mo is just the same as scenario number 1. Wala kang babayaran na cash. So entry mo lang, ibalik mo lang yung asset kay lessor. Credit mo yung ROA at cost, debit mo yung accumulated depreciation, loss natin is 15,000. Again, for scenario number 3, same journal entry lang yan as scenario number 1. Okay? So that's how you do a lease if it's with guaranteed residual value. Now, i-compare natin yung class. Sa illustrative example number 5 natin, what if the lease has an unguaranteed residual value? So, ano ibig sabihin ng unguaranteed? Ibig sabihin, wala tayong ina-assure kay lessor. Wala tayong promise sa kanya kung how much yung residual value at the end of the lease term. Okay? Opposite lang yan ng GRV. And take note class na yung URV or unguaranteed residual value, wala siya dito sa in-enumerate natin. It means URV is not part of the present value of minimum lease payments. Hindi siya part of our lease liabilities. Okay? So, ganito mangyayari dyan. Illustrative example, number 5. Let's take a look at the requirements, basically to prepare the journal entries. Let's read the given. Company X has maintained a policy of acquiring equipment by leasing. On January 1, Company X entered into a lease agreement for an equipment. The lease stipulates an annual rental payment of 600,000 to be paid every December 31. So, January 1 ngayon, ang unang bayaran, December 31. Gagamitin mo dyan, ordinary annuity. The lease contains neither a transfer of title nor a purchase option. The equipment has a residual value at the end of 5-year lease period, but is unguaranteed by the lessee. Kaya, unguaranteed residual value. The economic life of the equipment is 8 years. The implicit interest rate is 12%, considering the unguaranteed residual value. The present value for ordinary annuity is 3.6. So, ganito gagawin ko yung class. So, meron tayong rentals na 600,000 per year. Multiply natin by present value of ordinary annuity na 3.6. 600,000 times 3.6. You get 260,000. Okay? 260,000. This is our lease liability. Alright? Entry natin, January 1, 2025, debit ROA, credit lease liability, 260,000. And then December 31, 2025, di na ako gagawin table because ang taon lang naman is 2025, meron tayong interest expense, debit interest expense, credit cash, which is 260,000 times 12%. Confirm nga natin, 260,000 times 12%, 259,200. Right? Bayaran natin yung principal, debit lease liability, credit cash. So again, payment is 600,000 per year, minus yung interest, 600,000 minus 259,200. Principal component is 340,800. Since meron tayong ROA, kailangan mag-depreciate tayo. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, how much yan? 260,000, i-divide natin by what is the lease term here. Lease term natin is 5 years. Okay? 260,000, kasi sabi sa problem, tingin ka dun sa paragraph number 2, sa last sentence. The lease contains neither a transfer of title to the lessee nor a purchase option. So kapag ganun, babalik yung property to the lessor kasi yun yung default. Okay? Kaya divide lang natin yan by the lease term. 260,000 divided by 5, you get 432,000. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, 432,000. Class, ano napansin nyo sa ginawa natin? Kapag unguaranteed residual value, URV, hindi siya kasama sa computation of lease liability. Okay? Kapag URV, hindi siya kasama sa computation ng depreciation expense. Kung mapapansin nyo sa depreciation natin, di ba dapat cost minus residual value. In-ignore natin yung unguaranteed residual value. Okay? So in short, sa point of view ni lessee, susulat mo to. Sa point of view ni lessee, yung unguaranteed residual value is always ignored. Okay? I-disregard mo lang yung URV. Ano yung important kay lessee? GRV. URV, hindi siya important kay lessee. Kanino siya important? Kay lessor. Mamaya aralin natin yan. Okay, so tingnan natin class yung requirement number 2. Prepare journal entry on December 31, 2029 to record the return of the equipment. Siyempre, babalik mo kay lessor yan. Tama? The fair value of the equipment is 200,000. Wala tayong pakialam dyan sa fair value because pag unguaranteed residual value, again, ignore lang yan sa point of view ni lessee. So entry mo lang, ibalik mo lang yung asset. So credit ROA, debit accumulated depreciation, how much yung total yan? Well, eventually fully depreciated yan, 260,000. So ito lang, yung entry mo, i-reverse mo lang, ibalik mo kay lessor. Debit accumulated depreciation, credit ROA, 260,000. Again, pag URV, totally ignored yan sa point of view ni lessee. Okay? And then last problem for lessee's point of view. Okay, last na to. Sabi ko kanina class, ang general rule natin from the point of view of the lessee, finance lease. So yung ginawa natin from illustrative examples 1 to 5, yun yung accounting treatment for finance lease. But there are 2 exceptions wherein pwede natin i-apply yung operating lease model. Okay, ano ulit yung 2 exceptions? If the lease is short term, ibig sabihin 12 months or less, or the leased asset is of low value. Okay, in that case, tandaan mo lang class, kapag operating lease, actually madali lang yan. Kapag operating lease, i-apply lang natin is the straight line method. Okay, sulat mo dyan. Kapag operating lease, straight line method. Sir, paano yung straight line method? Illustrate ko sa inyo. Let's go to illustrative example number 6. I'll show you kung paano yung straight line method. So from the name itself, straight line. Alam natin, kapag depreciation, pag sabi straight line, fixed amount per year yan. Okay? Sige. Prepare the journal entries. Let's read the given. On January 1, 2025, Company X entered into a 3-year lease of a group of office furniture with similar nature. Company X assessed that the lease is a lease of an underlying asset of low value. Okay, so ito siya. Low value, operating lease gagamitin natin. And elected to apply the recognition exemption of IFRS 16. So, take note class na kapag low value, hindi necessary na 12 months or less. Independent yan. So, low value na long term, okay, in this case 3 years, is still operating lease yan. Alright, so ulitin ko, kapag low value kahit more than 1 year, okay lang. The annual lease payments payable at the end of each year as follows. So again, for 3 years, first year, 2025, 8,000 daw yung babayaran for the whole year. 2026, 12,000. 2027, 14,000. If you notice, iba-iba yung amounts, 8, 12, and 14. As an inducement to enter the lease, the lessor granted Company X the first 6 months of the lease as rent-free. Oy, may grace period. So ibig sabihin, hindi kailangan magbayad for the first 6 months in 2025. Okay, so ganito gagawin ko yung class. For illustrative example number 6, again, operating lease yan. I-apply mo dyan is the straight line method. Sir, paano ba yung straight line method? Ang muna mong gagawin dyan, class, is to compute for the total payments. In 2025, tama ba, class? Ang makukuha natin dyan, or ang babayaran natin kay lessor, 8,000 for the whole year. Kaya lang may grace period na 6 months. So, times 6 over 12. Ang babayad mo lang kay lessor is 4,000. Does that make sense? Tama lang kasi nakalagay dyan 8,000 daw yung annual lease payments. Pero may grace period na 6 months, so kalahati lang, 4,000 lang. In 2026, ang babayaran is 12,000. 2027, babayaran natin kay lessor is 14,000. Again, point of view tayo ni lessee. 4,000 plus 12,000 plus 14,000, you should get 30,000. Ito yung total payments natin all throughout the lease term. Okay? Pag sinabing straight line, dapat fixed amount per year yan. Okay? Divide mo by 3 yan. 30,000 divided by 3, that's 10,000. This is our expense. Every year, magre-record tayo ng 10,000 expense. Okay? Pakita ko yung journal entry. In 2025, entry natin, debit rent expense. So, ang term is rent expense kasi operating lease. Okay? 10,000. Pero yung actual cash na ibabayad natin, 4,000. Credit cash, 4,000. Yung balancing figure natin class, credit rent payable, 6,000. Kumbaga, parang meron tayong accrued rent. Okay? Rent expense, 10,000. Yung-compute natin under straight line method. Credit cash, na actual payment. Rent payable yung balancing figure. 2026, debit rent expense, 10,000. Yung actual payment natin is 12,000. Credit cash, 12,000. Balancing figure, meron tayong debit rent payable, 2,000. Yun. And then last year, 2027, debit rent expense, 10,000. Credit cash, 14,000. Debit rent payable, balancing figure natin is 4,000. Ayun, ito yung journal entries natin from 2025 to 2027. So, papakita ko lang sa inyo class, yung T account ng rent payable natin. Rent payable. So, meron tayong rent payable na 6,000 beginning 2025. Nag-debit tayo ng 2,000 in 2026. Nag-debit tayo ng 4,000 in 2027. Ibig sabihin class, zero na yung rent payable natin at the end of lease term. This is how you apply straight line method. Applicable siya again for operating lease. Okay, so ulitin ko, pag straight line method, compute mo lahat ng total payments. Na-compute natin is 30,000. Divide mo by lease term, ibig sabihin 10,000 yung expense natin. 2025, 10,000 rent expense. 2026, 10,000 rent expense. 2027, 10,000 rent expense. Kaya tinawag siyang straight line. Balancing figure, compare mo yan sa cash na actual na binayaran natin. Balancing figure dyan is the rent payable para ka nag-accrued rent. Okay, so end of the lease term, again, zero na yan pag gumamit ka ng T account. Okay, so that's how you do it for illustrative example number 6. Ayan, yun for the point of view of the lessee. Punta tayo sa theory question. Sagutan natin class yung mga related sa point of view of the lessee. Let's go to theory number 1. The lessee may apply the operating lease model under what condition? O yun, letter C yan. Both short-term and low value. Letter C for theory number 1. Number 2, a short-term lease is defined as 12 months or less. Ito siya, 12 months or less, letter A for number 2. Number 3, which statement is true about low value lease? FYI na lang to class. No? Low value lease again, operating lease yan. No? So letter A. Actually, dog yung sagot dyan. All of the above statements are true. Pero isa-isayin natin. Letter A, the value of an underlying asset is based on the value of the asset when new regardless of the age of the asset. So, ibig sabihin na yung class, yung assessment natin, kung yung asset is of low value, i-assess natin siya kung kailan natin siya binili. Okay? Hindi kung ilang taon na siya ngayon. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng letter A. Letter B, the term of the low value lease may be more than 12 months. So, parang sinagot natin kayo na 3 years. So, pwede yan. True din yan. Letter C, an underlying asset doesn't qualify as low value if the nature of the asset is such that the asset is typically not of low value when new or kung kailan binili natin. So, ulitin ko yung assessment, if the asset is of low or high value, ina-assess natin yan nung time na binili natin, hindi kung ilang taon na siya ngayon. Okay? Dog for number 3. Number 4, under IFRS 16, a lessee is required to account for all leases as a finance lease. Yung general rule natin. And recognize kapag finance lease, debit ROA, credit lease liability. Letter A for number 4. Number 5, the cost of right of use asset. Ito siya, kinakapitalize natin. A, present value of lease payments, yes. PV of MLP. B, lease payments made to lessor on or before commencement date. Initial direct cost, yes. Estimated cost of dismantling and restoring the underlying asset. Okay sana, kaya lang nakalagay for which the lease has no obligation. Hindi. Bago may capitalize yung restoration cost, dapat written yan. Sa contract, dapat required tayo or may obligation tayo. So, except, dog for number 5. Number 6, what is the cost basis of an asset acquired by a lease, which is in substance an installment purchase? So, ibig sabihin lang yung class, pag nag-lease tayo, okay, sa point of view of the lessee, it's as if binabayaran natin yung asset in installment. Kasi nga, syempre, bayaran natin dyan every year. So, pine-present value natin siya, letter C, the present value of the amount of future minimum lease payments, MLP. Okay, under the lease discounted at an appropriate rate, ang tawag natin sa rate na yun, implicit interest rate. Letter C for number 6. Number 7, under PFR 16, minimum lease payments may include bargain purchase option or yung purchase option, yes. Guaranteed residual value, yes. Periodic rental payments, yung fixed rentals, yes. So, dog yan, any of this for number 7. Number 8, the interest rate implicit in the lease is a discount rate that causes the aggregate of the PV of MLP and the unguaranteed residual value equal to, eto FYI na lang muna to class. Babalikan natin to, kasi actually ito yung definition talaga of the implicit interest rate. Babalikan natin yan when we discuss yung point of view of the lessor. Pero basically, sagot mo dyan is BOI, fair value of the asset, and initial direct cost of the lessor. So again, babalikan natin yan. BOI for number 8. Number 9, in computing the depreciation of right of use asset, the lessee should subtract, again, straight line method yung by default, okay, so compute for the depreciation. Tingnan natin kung ano yung subtract natin. A and B, nakalagay guaranteed residual value. C and D, unguaranteed residual value. Hinighlight ko earlier, okay, sabi ko, pag unguaranteed, i-ignore mo yan pag si lessee ka. So mali na yung C and D, tama? Now, A, a guaranteed residual value and depreciate over the life of the asset or useful life. B, a guaranteed residual value and depreciate over the term of the lease or yung lease term. Saan mo i-depreciate kapag guaranteed residual value? Since pag guaranteed residual value, babalik mo yan sa lessor, ibig sabihin, over the lease term lang. Okay, after the lease term, balik mo na yung asset sa lessor. Answer natin for number 9 is boy. Okay, so ayan, I think yan lahat ng questions na related to the lessee.